Parallel Lives. Today we're talking about immersive daydreaming and maladaptive daydreaming and how they're similar and how they're different. I'm Dimmer, and this is my co-host Levi.
Hello.
Talking about that with us today is Rain from Philippines and Halo, North Carolina.
Hey there.
Hello.
So I guess we should start off with like a little explanation of what immersive and maladaptive daydreaming are to begin with. And it's so weird because immersive daydreaming comes first, but as we conceptualize it, maladaptive daydreaming came first, and then we figured out immersive daydreaming. Well, how would you guys define them?
In the community, usually there seems to be a lot of vague misunderstandings about it. And usually, based off of what I've seen and everything, normal daydreaming is different from immersive and maladaptive. Normal daydreams and normal thoughts. Typically, immersive daydreaming is connected with some kind of, oftentimes, physical movement, like pacing or twitching or face movements, expressions, sometimes whispering. People often also listen to music, and it's all usually to get into a deeper, more immersive, almost like trance-like state sometimes, to go deeper into more vivid daydreams. And this is different from regular daydreaming, what regular people in their everyday lives normally do. And maladaptive daydreaming is usually like a subset of the immersive daydreaming. So it's immersive daydreaming, but at some point where it becomes unhealthy for the person's life.
And for maladaptive, it also gets into like schedules, and what Halo said, it messes up your daily life, and it becomes an unhealthy thing.
And it also is tied in with many different comorbid disorders. So if you have maladaptive daydreaming and it becomes unhealthy in your life, it seems to be connected with many other disorders. You're more likely to have ADHD, OCD, social anxiety issues, depression than people of the average, than normal average people. And not every maladaptive daydreamer has these, of course, but they're quite a bit more common than for regular people as well. So sometimes they have many negative maladaptive issues in their lives connected to their daydreaming, but many of us don't seem to recognize that there's a connection with between those issues and their daydreaming.
I'd like to add to what Halo said. According to Oxford Languages, the meaning of maladaptive is like it's an adjective that describes something that is not providing adequate or appropriate adjustment to the environment or situation. So I guess it adds on to what Halo said, like it could come from something. I don't know if everyone that has MD has experienced something bad or traumatic in their lives, but it could be like a reason or a link to MD alongside what Halo said, the comorbid disorders.
What do you think these terms, especially maladaptive and immersive daydreaming, are so misunderstood? Not misunderstood, but maybe more mistaken for each other very often. Why don't people get it? That's what I'm getting at, but I'm trying to think of a better way to say it.
I think you said it fine. I think that it's a combination of misinformation. If you just go on a lot of sources on Tumblr, YouTube, different social media pages, I see pages like infographics, and people with all kinds of YouTube channels and other things mix them up themselves all the time. And there are also large groups, let's say on Reddit or Facebook and other things. Sometimes you just have people that are new to the community or fairly new to the community. They don't really sometimes do much of the actual research, and they just kind of start talking about what they hear other people talking about. And then you have a lot of vague like on Reddit, for instance, it's kind of famous that nobody reads the sidebar, nobody reads the wiki. So then you have a lot of people out there that are talking about it, but are really misinformed about the subject. And that misinformation can sometimes cause problems for people, and it's kind of annoying for the community sometimes.
I'll speak from experience because like the first thing I would say found out about MD and immersive, or the first thing I found out between maladaptive and immersive daydreaming was maladaptive. I did not know that there was a more healthy way of quote unquote healthy way of MDing. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but I guess I'll put it that way. I didn't know that there was such a thing as immersive daydreaming because it was not mentioned a lot from my sources as I was discovering stuff about MD. So yeah.
I think that is yes. I think that's a super common experience, especially for immersive daydreamers. It goes back to that maladaptive daydreaming came first. So what happened was maladaptive daydreaming was sort of discovered. It was named. Papers started being written about it, and it wasn't until pretty early on they had realized that there was something about MD that was innate, because almost all MDers were talking about developing it in childhood. So there was something there that we were probably born with, but it took them a while to conceptualize that, and that turned out to be immersive daydreaming. All maladaptive daydreamers are immersive daydreamers, where I think, like Halo said, we're a subset of immersive daydreamers. But we didn't realize that bigger umbrella term existed until well after maladaptive daydreaming as a concept had a foothold. So now, when an immersive daydreamer is wondering about, does everybody do this, or why doesn't anyone else do this? And maybe it doesn't bother them at all, but they want to know more about it, so they Google it. They don't find immersive daydreaming. They find maladaptive daydreaming. Yeah, they find maladaptive daydreaming first, and it takes them a while. Like they're in that community for a little while before they start realizing that immersive daydreaming is something that might better describe them.
I think for me, there's also this thing like, when although I know that MD is, threading the lines between I'm a disorder and I'm not a disorder that could be diagnosed. Immersive is kind of like the more quote unquote positive version of MD, I guess. Again, it's more healthy. It's not as unhealthy as MD, or it's not unhealthy at all. So really, it's a healthy version of MD, I guess. Like, are there any positive versions of other disorders? Is there a positive counterpart to depression other than being cured of depression or not having a depression? Is there a positive counterpart to anxiety other than being cured of anxiety or not having anxiety? From what I know, not really. So I guess that could play to it, like, not really like, again, disorders not really having quote unquote positive counterparts.
I think that also to add to what everyone said, when people are unfamiliar with the difference between immersive daydreaming and maladaptive daydreaming, they sort of look into the word immersive, because MD is also immersive. Like we immerse ourselves in daydreams. But the problem is knowing the difference between immersive and maladaptive, like Dimmer mentioned, all maladaptive daydreamers are immersive daydreamers. So that's just like adding that bit of information as well to know the difference between being immersed and then being immersed to the point that it becomes maladaptive.
Going back to what Rain said, I never thought of that. Are there other disorders that have like a positive version, for lack of a better way to describe it?
Well, if you're going on to this kind of, if you want to talk about that, it's, in my opinion, many different disorders are sometimes good things or natural things, but taken too far. Be it eating disorders, either not eating or eating, there are certain schedules taken too far in any extreme can be unhealthy. There are certain things about, anger is a normal emotion and everything else. But if you have too much, you could have certain disorder about your anger. If you have certain things about anxiety, it's normal to worry about certain things, and being fearful for the future is just part of being human. and you need it to some extent, but too much, it could turn into some kind of anxiety disorder. So I think, like anything else, moderation is usually key, and it's for the immersive daydreaming, it turns into maladaptive when you kind of lose that moderation, and instead of daydreaming, say, some immersive daydreamers daydream a little bit a day to a couple hours a day, and it's still okay for them because it's still, doesn't really have much issue in their life. But then maladaptive daydreamers sometimes daydream 5-7 hours a day or more, and then it really starts eating into their social life, and it's hard to finish things all day because they're busy daydreaming, and we have the urges to daydream, and we want to stop doing things that are productive or help with our social sphere because we're busy daydreaming. And I think it's just that loss of moderation and loss of control of a normal thing that kind of spirals. That's at least the way I see it.
That's not untrue. That I definitely agree with everything you said, but I think there's still an extra layer of separation with us because everybody worries, but when it's taken to this extreme, it can be anxiety. Everybody eats, but when it's taken to the extreme, it can be an eating disorder. Not everybody immersively daydreams. So we already have like that weird othering before we even start to get into maladaptive territory.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Wolfie said something in the audience that I think we should probably touch on. What confuses me is what is considered maladaptive with daydreaming. Like, when is something harmful enough to become maladaptive? And if one wanted to be cured, how would you know you're cured if you're still immersive?
I'm not sure about that because I'm not really cured about. I mean, I'm working towards it, but I'm not completely cured of my quote unquote cured. Because again, with the that one episode, the myths, I think I remember there was a myth that it was diagnosable, like that was a myth. And well, yeah. Anyways, although I am working towards sort of fixing up my MD and wanting to become more on the immersive side, I think what kind of separates it is that again, immersive daydreaming is a more healthy. It's a healthy group of like people who tap into their daydreams more, who use mediums such as music, pacing, and etc. to daydream. Well, again, MD is the unhealthy one, the one that does not again provide adequate or appropriate adjustment to environments or situations that may be harmful, that may be traumatizing to the MDer.
I think it's incredibly subjective, and some people in the exact same experience sometimes might consider themselves maladaptive, other might consider themselves more immersive. Because if it's kind of also like a gradient. There are even some immersive, they say it's minor issues, like they daydream too much, or they have some concentration issues that might be connected with it, but then they don't really consider themselves to be maladaptive. So I think that it's kind of subjective, and and there's kind of a gradient, in my opinion. And at some point, it's hard to there isn't really a fine line between maladaptive, and it's kind of how the person perceives their life, and if it bothers their life, it's kind of up to the person to kind of make that decision. Though at some point, some people, if they are daydreaming 15, 18 hours a day, and then they're saying, no, I'm immersive, I just love, I don't have a problem. So, some people might have a problem despite saying that they don't. So I think that there is kind of a gray area, and it's hard because there aren't any direct fine lines to separate the two.
I think that's a really good point that Halo made, because I've heard someone else talk about people who, I think she's a therapist, but anyway, she spoke about how people would find out about maladaptive daydreaming and they would have it, but they would say, I never knew I had a problem. And that directly relates to what Halo said. For some people, it might be a problem, but they wouldn't necessarily know it.
Absolutely. I mean, I went through the same thing. As soon as I found MD, I was like, I'm getting my own timeline messed up here. But when I was younger, I very obviously had a problem. Very, very obviously. I could daydream through days, through like 48-hour binges. But I didn't know that daydreaming was the problem. I thought it was something else, and I don't know that I don't even know. I don't even know how to explain it. But it's just kind of something you have to live through, I guess. You can't find the words, but when you don't know that all of your issues are interconnected, and that they sort of have a root in one or two like bigger things, then you don't see that as the problem because it's just one tiny thing that's out there. I don't know if I'm making sense, but yeah, I didn't know that daydreaming was the problem until very late in my life. And even then, like when I was looking it up, I was looking it up because daydreaming was the most obvious symptom, not because I thought it was the root. And when I found MD, suddenly everything made sense. And I was like, oh, that is the problem, when I probably wouldn't have thought of it as the base of the problem previously.
I guess you could say that's how blurry the line between MD and immersive daydreaming is.
Yeah, you said subjective, or no, I think Halo said subjective. And I'm going to go off on a tangent here. Oh my God. So I was on Reddit.
What's your first problem?
I know, right? So no, I love this subreddit. I love it. Anyway, there was a popular post with lots of comments, and I noticed that a lot of the comments, especially a lot of the top ones, people were saying things like, "Yeah, I really think it's kind of a spectrum," or, I really think it's kind of a gradient, like you said. There's got to be something on this end and something on that end, and a ton of people in between. And I remember just sitting there thinking, like, of course it is. Um, of course it is. And that really muddies the space in between to know where it's maladaptive and where it's just immersive. Because, I mean, sure, you can be like pure immersive and have complete control all the time and never have a problem through your entire life. And you can be like pure maladaptive where it's always been a problem and there's nothing good about it. And it's horrible. But then there is so much in between where you can still be immersive but have problems with it. And you can still be maladaptive and not have certain issues like at all. Yeah, so I think what Wolfie was saying, like how do you know where that line is? There's a problem that a lot of people struggle with if they're not to the extreme end of one or the other.
I've been in voice chat with many people, and I've with similar questions, and I've given an analogy. This analogy might be terrible, but I say it's immersive daydreaming. Imagine that somebody has a cup of cocoa in their hands. And then sometimes sometimes the mug that you're drinking out of isn't hot at all, and they're able to drink out of it. And there's no problem with them. That could be like the pure immersive, like daydreaming, where they do it some, and there are no issues. But then sometimes that mug starts to get really hot and it starts burning your hands. And then at some point, it's starting to do damage to your body. At some point, it might be a little more maladaptive. But then if it's a little hot in your hands, but it's not really causing you issues, that could be immersive. But then when it starts getting maladaptive, it's like the heat and everything else starts catching things in your kitchen on fire. Then might have like a napkin on fire. Every so often you have to kick it out because you've been daydreaming too often. You're messing up your homework. You have some issues. And then it kind of gets more and more severe on the scale. Then some people have their kitchens on fire. It's hard for them to do their work in school, and they're failing, and they might lose their job and everything else. But there's that. And then some other people have their whole house on fire, and it's like, oh no, this is nightmare. I have to just stay out of their dream somehow. That's I said that analogy before. That might be a terrible analogy, but just kind of put it into a physical context. That's kind of how I was explaining it to people before.
I just wanted to say that I really like that. I really liked that analogy. That's all.
Yeah, it does. And and further muddying the waters is that line is different for everyone. Some people have a higher heat tolerance, and some people need to, throw the cup to the floor as soon as it's a bit warm. And and then denial, or maybe not even denial, but just not recognizing what the problem is, because this came up recently too. I can't remember where. Probably Reddit also. But you do get people, somebody mentioned it earlier. You do get people saying I don't think of it as a problem, even though when they describe what they're doing, it's kind of really overtly a problem. I mean, everybody is the captain of their own soul, but but just to point out, that's exactly what you would expect with a behavioral addiction. You would expect people to be in denial. You would expect people to find the behavior pleasurable and want to continue it. You would expect them to excuse it and jump through hoops trying to minimize it. And there's also a lot of that comes with it, and sort of blurs the line between, well, what is immersive and what is maladaptive.
Yeah, it's some I've talked to a lot of people on the voice chat and Discord, and several people say things like, I don't have any friends in real life, and I daydream, and they are the closest thing I have to friends that care about me. And I daydream 10 hours a day, but that's all I have. That's the most important thing to me in life, and I'm going to keep daydreaming. And that's kind of a mixture of denial, but also it's kind of using it to cope with other issues they have in life. Or other people, they say that they're missing out on things. They hate who they are. They have a physical disfigurement, or they absolutely, they have like other disorders where they can't live a normal functioning life, so they daydream instead. It's sometimes it's like people that are using, in my opinion, kind of like some people drown their sorrows in alcohol, and they just keep getting drunk because to kind of try to deal with their everyday lives. It's not a healthy coping mechanism by any means, but they kind of use it because they think it's worse to be without it, if that makes sense.
I think that when it comes to something like maladaptive daydreaming or even immersive daydreaming, it's a very personal, I can almost say intimate type of thing where it takes a lot for a person to maybe just take a step back and say, this is a problem. I'm I'm having issues with this thing, or this isn't a problem. I'm not going to turn it into one, if that makes sense. But it's very strange. It's a mental thing that just yeah, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but it sort of requires the person who has it to be very open and honest with themselves about how problematic it really is.
It really does. It really does. And I never know what to say or how to react when I get messages like that, or even see them in the wild. Cuz on the one hand, if someone has what I would perceive to be like a very obvious signs that this is maladaptive, even though they're saying it's not, then on the one hand, if that's how they're happy living their life, that's how they're happy living their life. Leave them alone. Let them do their thing. But on the other hand, like, what if they just don't know there's a better way? What if they're just afraid? And I don't know. I care about the community. I don't want people to not better their lives because they're freaked out about being honest with themselves in the way that Levi was kind of alluding to. But you don't know. You don't know which ones are the ones that actually need help and which ones are the ones that are fine living their lives how they want.
Plus, like, how would they respond? Like, number one, people could be like, "No, why are you giving me help? You're not even you're not like." For those who are not therapists but just really want to help their loved ones, or even just people on like the internet or in real life, they could respond with stuff like, "Okay, how can I get help?" Or worse, like something like, Why are you trying to give me help? You're not even a freaking mental. You're not even a mental health professional. You're not even a therapist. How can you say that? And then they'd go on, and then you'd look like a sort of bad guy, in all honesty.
Yeah, it's definitely not on us to judge. I mean, well, okay, no. Like when I see them in the wild, I don't tend to. Sometimes I do, but I don't tend to reply because they say it's not a problem. It's not really my business until they're ready to confront that, if that is even the point that they get to. But when I get personal messages, like I feel like it's my responsibility to reply the best way I can. But on the flip side, because we're sort of coming at this from the maladaptive perspective, but going from the immersive side, like have you guys ever run across like the opposite, maladaptive daydreamers, or people identifying as maladaptive daydreamers, who when they describe their experiences, you're left thinking, I don't think so. You're probably immersive.
I've been in the Immersive Daydreaming Discord server, and somebody said, "Oh, I've heard about maladaptive daydreaming, where it starts to become a problem." And then I was like, "Yeah." And some of us in the Maladaptive Daydreaming server here were kind of going over there and talking to people. Person said, "Oh, I think I might be maladaptive because once in a while I daydream for like 20 or 30 minutes a day, and I'm thinking like, oh, I could have been doing something else." And the rest of us were like, "Oh, that doesn't sound like maladaptive. I think you're okay. I think you're okay, buddy." And it's yeah, there. Some people do think like they're 20-minute binges every like once a week. They're wondering maybe that's a problem, but it seems to be it seems to be fine.
I remember a friend of mine, like when I tried to like explain to her like, hey, I have something called maladaptive daydreaming, and then I went on with the explanations and stuff. She related her experience of like sometimes pacing around the whole house, like she was thinking of plots, the regular immersive thing. Like you have mediums where you tap into your daydreams and so on and so forth. And then she'd say that her parents like would say like in Tagalog, this in Tagalog, I'll probably just translate it. Oy, kanina ka pa nag-go walk dyan. It means like, oh, you've been walking for a while now, something like that. It's not a direct translation, but it's a rough translation. So yeah, I was like, I don't remember how I responded, but I was like, I mean, from what you said, that's not really maladaptive. It's more of immersive. I don't know if she really has immersive, but it's sort of a sign, but again, it's not really MD yet, unless again it gets unhealthy and so on and so forth.
I think we also need to mention that some people can also go back and forth because it is kind of gradient. Sometimes it only becomes maladaptive if people are going through certain negative stressors throughout their lives. And some people all of a sudden they say they have a test coming up, or a family member has a certain illness, or they're under, or they watch a certain movie that they've been really into, so then they've been daydreaming more. So sometimes then all of a sudden the scale's a little tipped, and then their daydreaming starts becoming a little negative on their lives for a while. And then sometimes when those stressors are gone, sometimes they're daydreaming less, or it's causing less issues in their lives, and then they might be on the more of the immersive side. So people aren't necessarily locked into, like, once somebody's a maladaptive daydreamer, it's not like that they're stuck there forever. Hypothetically, people can also go back and forth as well. And I guess I'll mention it as a personal note. I've cut back my immersive daydreaming dramatically, as well as for the last, I don't know, 6 months or so, 5 6 months. And my symptoms are dramatically improved. My overall quality of life has dramatically improved. It's like many of my symptoms, my concentration, focus, blah blah blah. But I just want to say, at some point, I've been wondering myself, at what point could I be a former maladaptive daydreamer and more on the immersive side? That's been something I've been wondering to myself. Is there a certain point when I would see it, or yeah, there? So I think that's worth mentioning as well.
I've wondered about that too, because that's the goal for a lot of maladaptive daydreamers is to get a hold on it so complete that they can just call themselves an immersive daydreamer and just be an immersive daydreamer. That's the goal. Move from maladaptive daydreaming to immersive. But I'm wondering if it's something more like alcoholism, where even for many years, maybe even for a lifetime of sobriety, you still identify as an alcoholic. You still can't, touch alcohol because that's still in you. Am I making sense? I know some sober alcoholics. They're in recovery. They describe themselves as sober for 6 years, sober for 16 years, but they're still identifying as an alcoholic.
I'm not sure. I think that the brain scan, they've been doing some brain scan research on maladaptive daydreaming. I think that that's going to shed more light on it than anything, because we could see directly, are the pleasure centers of the brain like lighting up like a Christmas tree, like certain other disorders? What are the differences on the brain scans between the immersive and the maladaptive daydreamers? I think that we have so much research that is being worked on that isn't published yet. I think that that's going to really give us more objective and clear like results and stuff that we could go off of than kind of taking stabs in the dark at it. I don't know. I only know my personal experiences and the experiences of people I've talked to, and it's kind of been different for people. Some people they've been kind of getting better, but then they're still daydreaming some. Some people tried to quit it completely. Personally, I daydreamed for about 15 minutes yesterday, which is more than I usually do, like per day now, but I still feel completely fine after, 15, 20 minutes a day, this and that. So I'm not sure. And I just really am eager for that kind of objective scientific evidence that we could have in the future. I think that that's going to really be huge for our community.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because this entire podcast, not just this episode, but every episode that we've done is experiential. Like we don't have a lot of the hard answers. Our guests don't have the hard answers. Some of the things we talk about, there just isn't research there. All we can talk about is our personal experiences. And I think my personal experience is a little different to yours, Halo, in that I really don't think that in my life there's ever going to be a time where I won't be imminently at risk of relapse. Like I think this is something I'm going to have to work on for potentially my entire life, and I'm okay with that. Like I'm getting better. I still feel like I'm only halfway there, but even when I'm 100% there, I feel like I'll always be one tragedy away from becoming a full-blown maladaptive daydreamer again.
I agree. It's gonna be like a lifetime battle for some, and some, well, they'll resolve their issues and probably, some will go back to just immersive, some may relapse, as you guys said, and some may just not really quit, but for lack of a better word, quit immersive and maladaptive dreaming, for their lifetime. I mean, like, um, different folks, different strokes, I guess.
Oh, we actually have a question from the audience. Yeah, Helga in the audience says, how come some MDers need pacing and others seem to be satisfied with just staring into oblivion while staying still? Pacers versus stay stillers? I like that. I used to be a stay stiller, but it evolved into pacing. I wish I knew why, though. Sometimes I jump off my bed when I reach the climax of the daydream. That is actually how I motivate myself to get out of bed in the morning.
I think it's just like how different people daydream. I mean, again, different folks, different strokes.
I mean, I know what the research says about this, but I'm wondering, have you guys are you guys pacers? First of all, I guess.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, but I could also stay still. But if I had to choose, I would rather pace.
Yes. I guess my mannerisms while I daydream are pacing, dancing, and jumping a lot. There are a lot of times wherein our ceiling fan nearly fell off because I kept on jumping due to MD, and I'm not stopping at any time, probably, honestly. And another mannerism of mine is like talking to myself, so I look weird. I honestly look weird. I look so weird.
I'm a stay stiller. Levi, I don't think I actually know what you are. Are you a pacer or a stay stiller?
I do everything. It's whatever I'm in the mood for, it just happens.
Oh, so you and Halo oscillate. Rain's a pacer, and I stay still. What I understand from the research, I mean, just obviously not a scientist or anything, or not a professional, but it's accidental. It's accidental who ends up as pacers and who ends up as being still. And most commonly, people usually have a repetitive movement. It doesn't have to be pacing. Sometimes it's something else. It's twirling something or rocking or jumping or swinging or whatever. But repetitive movement anyway is common. It's more common, a lot more common than staying still. And the working theory, as far as I'm aware, is that because immersive daydreaming is an innate trait, we discover that innate trait when we're very young. And then we sort of also accidentally discover that if we do it while we're walking around, it puts us into a trance or a trance-like state and lets us go deeper, longer. And because you discovered this so young, you don't really connect why it's happening. By the time you're like, hey, what is this? This is weird. You've forgotten. You forgot how it started. It started so long ago. You just kind of naturally stumbled on it. And some stay stillers, I guess either one, never discovered that, or two, I think there's a stat in one of the papers that says 9% of the stay stillers actually started as pacers, but they were caught by their parents and they were shamed or disciplined into ridding themselves of that habit, which is actually a very sad statistic.
I just want to add a personal experience from what Dimmer said when you discover, well, not really discover, but when you like do stuff when you're young. Like when I was younger, when I was like a kid, I remember, doing role play games. You know, those games where you and your friends pretend that you're like cartoon characters from a certain franchise, and well, I went into like, role playing and stuff, and I guess that developed into MD. I mean, immersive first and then MD, something like that. And then pacing, because like we ran around a lot. And then talking to myself because, well, I talked to my friends a lot. Plus, they were based off of cartoons with dialogues and stuff alongside background music, which is why my main medium for daydreaming is music.
You know what I just realized I don't know is we know that pacing is super common among maladaptive daydreamers, but I'm wondering how common, if there's a statistic on how many immersive daydreamers do it.
I'm not sure if there's a statistic, but many of the ones I've talked to also pace, and that's that's one of the reasons why they're so confused with it, because immersive daydreamers, when they look up their daydreaming, they find maladaptive daydreaming, and then they see so many commonalities with it, they assume, oh, this is what I have. I also pace, I also listen to music, I also have these deep daydreams, I'm also doing all these things. And then they think that I must be a maladaptive daydreamer, whatever that is. And then then they see all these people complaining about it, then they're thinking, what? It's great. What are these people talking about? They're just complaining over nothing. This is great. And they're kind of, I think, using their personal experience is kind of, they kind of see it through their point of view, and they're not seeing that it actually is harming other people, if that makes sense.
I don't know. I don't want to get us too off topic here, but I feel like this is something I see a lot is when we share the diagnostic criteria with people, because a lot of people come in into the server, into the Reddit, into any number of communities with the posts like, hey, do you guys think that what I'm doing is maladaptive daydreaming? I've read a little bit about it, but I'm still not sure. Here's my experience. What do you think? Obviously, we can't diagnose anybody over the internet from, a one paragraph post. Or it wouldn't even matter. They could write us an essay. We can't diagnose them. But they do ask for our opinions, and we share with them the diagnostic criteria. And they'll say, well, I must be a maladaptive daydreamer. I check every single box on the symptom list, but I don't have any distress or dysfunction. So they're seeing the symptoms like a checklist, but the symptoms aren't a checklist. You actually only need 2 symptoms on that list of 8. And we'll put in the description, we'll put the diagnostic criteria in the description so you guys can see it. There is a little list, but it's not a checklist. You have to read through the whole thing. You only need 2 of those. Only 2 of those 8 listed, and one of them is pre-chosen for you. So you actually only need 1 additional. So you need 2 symptoms, you need distress and dysfunction, and you need for it not to be caused by something else. Those are the 3. So they have 1, but not the distress and dysfunction one, not the other one. But they just ignore that one because they feel like that's only 1 out of 9, but it's not. It's 1 out of 2. I hope that made sense.
I think another thing that I see quite often is people they say that they're both because they look at the specifically at the how can I say this, like immersive not being a problem and maladaptive being a problem, where they'd say sometimes I absolutely love my daydreams, but other times it kind of interferes with my life. So now I have this question, like how can we, as maladaptive daydreamers or immersive daydreamers, sort of explain how, well, maybe not explain, but how can we help out with that confusion between, people being uncertain, or maybe they're maladaptive daydreamers, but they only look into that one, check mark thing. Does that make sense? I'm not sure.
No. No, I'm sorry. I think I missed the plot there. The point, because maladaptive daydreamers do love their daydreaming. I think, what? I think that's a myth that needs to be busted for people to be more
I was
understanding.
about to disagree with you actually, because some people daydream things that do bother them. I know certain people that they have that constantly have this thing they need to daydream about their, let's say, witch paracosm, and they daydream about being a witch and doing different things, having this world. Then they say it conflicts against their religion, and then they're torn apart inside. Or they're daydreaming about gore, and they say they don't kind of want to see it because they think it's wrong, or they daydream about being a villain in their daydreams, doing criminal acts all the time, and then all of a sudden afterwards their conscience like kicks in, and then they're thinking, what did I just do in this daydream world? I just did all these horrible actions. I'm a monster. And then you sometimes hear cultural and just like conscious kind of things that really end up bothering them with their daydreams sometimes. Though this is only a small fraction of the people, but this is something I've heard over and over from people.
I just wanted to say I don't think it's about the content being daydreamed about. It's more like people would say, I think I have maladaptive daydreaming because my daydreaming is interfering with my daily functions and it causes distress, but also at the same time it doesn't. And then people would label themselves as both maladaptive and immersive, but they don't understand that maladaptive daydreamers are also immersive daydreamers. So my question was basically, how can we make it more clear to people that it's not about being one or the other, or like being smack bang in the middle of both, right? It's yeah. But I'm sorry, I don't know how to phrase that question, but yeah, it's just the confusion between, does it affect you negatively, your daydreaming, like how much you daydream, and whether it interferes with your daily life and stuff like that. I'm probably not making sense. Yeah.
This is going to sound so silly because that was a serious question, but I think the serious answer is memes and infographics. Like a picture of the gradient, a picture of the continuum that we are talking about. Like I think that would spread and be way more helpful than like a paper or a text post to really visualize and get to as many people as possible. That it is a spectrum, it is a continuum.
It pains me to say that I think you're right, that that's the best way to kind of spread the information to people.
I feel like it'll be something like those 16 personality types of people that, like, those personality types like ENFP or whatsoever. Like, there's this quiz site. I guess it's a good source if you want to look at those like personalities and see which one you are, I guess. And like, there's all those fancy words, but instead people use memes to summarize those personalities and they understand it more.
Yeah, I'm gonna steal my son's crayons and get to work on this. I want to go back to what Halo was saying though, because I actually have I like two things to say about that. Where Halo was saying, what was he saying? He was saying people are actually disturbed by their daydreams. So yes, that's not untrue. Okay, I would say in maladaptive daydreaming, it is almost always enjoyable. There are outliers. There are going to be people who are disturbed by their daydreams, but they're a lot less common. And then they might seem more common because what I think is actually happening, especially where you were saying, people will daydream this terrible stuff and then they're like, oh, I'm a monster. Are they saying that because the daydreaming actually disturbed them or because the way they felt disturbed them? Like, because I am a violent daydreamer. I have very violent daydreams, and I had those exact same experiences. And I feel like I can relate to the type of people that you were talking about, where the daydream itself is enjoyable. I enjoy the violence of my daydream, you know, but when you come out of the daydream, you look back on it and you're like, holy shit, what's wrong with me? And that's where the distress is. The distress isn't coming from the daydream. It's coming from you thinking there's something wrong with you because how could I possibly enjoy that? I must be a monster. So I think that's the explanation for why people might find or say that the daydreams are disturbing. Either they actually are and they're one of those lesser common types, or they're just sort of getting caught up in language where it's not the daydream itself. They actually do enjoy the daydream, but they're wondering what is wrong with them. How could they enjoy something like that? They're a good person, but they must secretly be a bad person.
Guilty conscience. Really guilty conscience.
I think also, maladaptive daydreaming and immersive daydreaming are still our little coping mechanisms, right? Maybe not for everyone. Sometimes it's for boredom or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's well, okay. Let me rather say this from a personal point of view. It's sort of like a mental punching bag where sometimes I do get angry, but in my mind, I can, like Dimmer said, I can have very violent daydreams and take care of that anger or take care of those feelings instead of having it sort of play out in real life. And I think that yes, it will make people feel bad, because I mean it's like Rain said, having that conscience, and we're all human. But at the end of the day, that's it's also sort of normal. I know that in psychology, there's I can't remember the word for it, but when people think, oh, sometimes you just think, oh, what if I stab this person or whatever? It's quite dark, but our minds are very curious. It sort of it has to sort of explore different possibilities and feelings and things like that without us really acting out on it. And I think that that also relates to maladaptive daydreaming and immersive daydreaming, where sometimes it's healthy to have that, even if it does sort of contrast in what we believe in real life and stuff like that. So being maladaptive daydreamers and immersive daydreamers, we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much. We should give ourselves a break. But that's also just from my personal point of view.
Just to add, um, I think that when we daydream of stuff like disturbing stuff, such as disturbing events, disturbing actions, and so on and so forth, I think that people would just question themselves like, I'm supposedly a decent human being. Why am I doing this? Why am I daydreaming about this rather? Uh, I know the law. I follow the law. So why am I daydreaming of this? And for me, according to my experience, I also kind of quote unquote beat myself up for doing that. At the same time, it's like I beat myself for beating myself up. Like I'm kind of like, no, 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 it's just a daydream. And at the same time, I feel guilty for it.
I guess I'll just quickly mention. I think that this is kind of off the subject, but uh, on this topic, I kind of think it's like roller coasters and horror movies and horror video games. I think it's kind of in those same veins sometimes of the negative daydreams, but it's like it doesn't mean that you're like a monster, and it is like normal and healthy and like to experience certain things like Levi said.
Yeah, we should do a whole episode on the violent themes in maladaptive daydreaming, because it's really a topic that could take a whole hour to itself. But to get back to immersive daydreaming, I think another thing that sort of obscures the differences between immersive daydreaming and maladaptive daydreaming is daydreaming itself, and how that is seen in society, I guess, really. Because when you think of daydreaming, what do you think of? You think of spacey little children staring out the window in a boring lecture. And when you start seeing daydreaming in people who aren't children anymore, people who are coming into their teens and into their adulthood, or are adults, then it's not cute anymore. It's not just some kid getting through a boring lecture. Now you're lazy, So there's a stigma to it, I guess. I'm not sure stigma is the right word, but there's a construct there, like how we see daydreaming as not an adult thing. And if it is an adult thing, it's not a harmful adult thing. So if it is harming you, if you are doing it more than normal, then what the hell is wrong with you? And I think that's a reason why a lot of people who might better be classified as immersive daydreamers, non-pathological immersive daydreamers, start thinking that they're maladaptive daydreamers, because they think there's already something wrong with them to begin with, because daydreaming has this sort of lazy, unproductive, what are you doing with your life vibe in adulthood.
Yeah, totally. And like Levi said, the awareness is a big issue with this. And if you're going to look at other disorders, I mean, everybody knows about autism. Everybody knows about things about depression. Everybody knows about all these other, like they have awareness campaigns and sometimes TV commercials. They talk about it on shows. Sometimes they have like meetups of different groups where they kind of spread awareness and they kind of help each other within the community. We don't really have any of that right now. And I think a lot of these issues are going to, at least I hope that a lot of these issues are going to be solved in the future if we can get more awareness and stuff into the community about this issue.
Yeah, awareness is huge. And a lot of the push for awareness is with maladaptive daydreaming. Like that's another thing. If we kind of throw back to the beginning of this episode, maladaptive daydreaming did come first, and then immersive daydreaming, like as a bigger thing, was named. And there just aren't communities for them. I can think of two off the top of my head, and neither are very active. So awareness for maladaptive daydreaming, because that's the disorder, right? You don't need a whole lot of awareness, I guess, for something that's not bothering anyone, for something that's fine and healthy. But so awareness for maladaptive daydreaming is spreading, and I hope will continue to spread. But immersive daydreaming, I think, is always going to lag behind. We are always going to be having immersive daydreamers who are worried for themselves because they found when they found a disorder.
You were saying it felt like hope to know about immersive daydreaming. You said it felt like hope to you.
Yeah, I was saying that was like my goal. If ever like I would quote unquote cure my MD, I would just like immersive because like my daydreams make me sort of happy. It's like I mean it kind of helps with creativity, I guess. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And then Kirk left the podcast.
See, I think that it's really important that we do, talk about that as well, because a lot of times, and I know that Dimmer also mentioned this in previous episodes, where when we talk to people about getting treatment for maladaptive daydreaming, a lot of maladaptive daydreamers do want to continue daydreaming. We have this connection with our paracosms. We really want to keep daydreaming, and it is enjoyable. We do like it. It helps with creativity and all that type of stuff. So a lot of maladaptive daydreamers really just do want to become immersive daydreamers. We don't want to get rid of it completely. I think it's impossible to not daydream. Daydreaming is normal for everyone. So I think it's really important for people also to know that immersive daydreaming is sort of, well, I can speak from personal experience again, but it's sort of the end goal, to have healthy daydreaming habits.
And I think that makes us circle back right to like the crux of the issue, which is, what are healthy daydreaming habits? How do you know where you cross the line, or how do you figure it out? Because, and the answer's messy. I don't even think there is an answer. You figure it out or you don't.
I mean, as Halo said, it's subjective. It's really subjective.
I think that I like to look at it from a moderation sense, and I kind of mentioned it on the recovery episode before, but I think some people use their daydreaming to kind of fill in certain goals or certain voids in their life, and I think that sometimes trying to balance their daydreaming with actually pursuing certain goals is much healthier. For instance, a lot of people daydream about being singers or artists or animators or something else, but at the same time they don't, or writers, but they don't practice those things in real life. I think that sometimes trying to experience those things outside of daydreams can sometimes give them a more healthy balance as well. Or certain people trying to talk to other people more, or even if it's just on the internet or other things, just trying to have a larger social network sometimes, or trying to have connections with other people. It kind of depends on what void your daydreams are kind of filling. I think finding that moderation with actual real life experiences is healthy for most people.
I think like Dimmer said earlier, to circle fully back to the beginning, is that it's going to come down to each person to be honest with themselves and to say, is this thing a problem? And if I do something about it, such as maybe try to become an immersive daydreamer, will that help me out?
I think that honest introspection, like Levi said, I think that's hard for many of us, because many of us love the daydream so much. It's part of who we are. A lot of us have done it for about as long as we could remember, and some of the characters are as close to people as like their real life friends and family, or sometimes closer. And trying to honestly look at that and about the issues that are possibly connected in your life with your daydreaming, that honest introspection is sometimes really difficult for people. And I think that sometimes talking with a therapist is sometimes good if you try to explain it, if they know about maladaptive daydreaming, sometimes just to try to get an outside perspective as well.
Yeah, I've been around the community too long. And I remember in the early days, what we used to say was, when we were confronted with these questions, was that, okay, so you found the word maladaptive daydreaming. Did you think it was a problem before you found the word? Because if you didn't, then you're not a maladaptive daydreamer. And this was very early on. I know that sounds a little crazy to say now, but back then, the only people we even knew about were the ones who had symptoms bad enough to Google them, the ones who already knew it was a problem. So it made sense, I guess, back then. But now, as awareness spreads, as we find more types of maladaptive daydreamers, as we find more types of immersive daydreamers and people who sit at different severities and you know, whatever's, it's not like that. It's not like that. That sounds stupid now in retrospect. You know, now it's, sometimes you really do just got to sit down with yourself. You might not have recognized it as a problem before. And it's a much longer process, and it's much more complicated than either just knowing or not knowing.
Yeah, I don't think, to add to that, I think it's very easy to, in the early days to have said that, but nowadays it's more about, we can't speak for anyone else. Or rather we can't, like, as we learn more about MD and ID, or yeah, ID. As we learn more about it, we learn more about the spectrum and all that type of stuff, and we realize that, it's not really our jobs to tell people what they have and what they don't have. However, it also depends on, are they spreading misinformation and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's not our place to tell people, okay, well, no, you're actually not an immersive daydreamer or not a maladaptive daydreamer, unless unless it can and does cause harm. That's just my opinion.
I think that brings us kind of towards the end of the podcast here. Unless anybody does the audience have any like last minute questions you want to sneak in, or Rain or Halo, anything that came up?
I think we can end with the what's something that you want to understand more about immersive daydreaming, just so that we can end on a note that, like, daydreamers can comment on in the comment section, I guess.
I think that is a good one. That is a good one for the audience, not just the live audience, but to anybody who's listening to this episode in the future. I think there's only a comment section on the YouTube. So if you're listening on Spotify and you want to reply to this, we're on YouTube too. Parallel Lives on YouTube, same name, same icon. What is something you want to understand more about maladaptive or immersive daydreaming? And maybe we can address that in future episodes. Anybody here, like in here, what do we want to understand about maladaptive immersive daydreaming? I want to know if it's possible. I want to know if I'm ever not going to be a maladaptive daydreamer, if I'm ever not going to be at risk of relapse, if I can get to a point where I'm just immersive and I stay that way forever. That's what I want to know.
I agree with Timber for maladaptive. I guess for immersive, how does it feel to be able to control your daydreams without I mean, I know this is not for like every single immersive daydreamer. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like, how do you guys feel about, having the quote unquote ability to take control of your daydreaming time, and how how do you how do you guys do it basically? I sincerely want to know. And how does it feel? Cuz like, I'm kind of used to having like urges at the wrong time and at the wrong place. But how does it feel to be like consistently okay with your immersive daydreaming? Like, again, I'm genuinely curious about how it feels. If you could put into words.
Let's see, if we're talking about things we want to know, I want to know all of the different brain scans and future studies. I want to see if being in a constant daydream state. Like a lot of people aren't just pacing and daydreaming on their own. Many of us are constantly daydreaming in the back of our minds, like while we're in school or at work or driving or whatever, talking to people. A lot of us are in a constant daydream state pretty much our entire lives. That's the way I used to be. I'm really curious if that affects the gray matter and white matter of our brains, if that constant stimulation, that constant work is kind of affecting our minds, and maybe if there's a connection with that to our concentration. And I'm just not sure, but I think it's a very interesting topic, as well as our other certain people in very high certain people in other areas also have trance-like states, like what we do when we daydream. For instance, there are certain people in video games and in chess and on other things where they're so immersed and they're so focused that they kind of everything else kind of is lost around them. Sam Shankland was a former U.S. champion of chess, and one time he said he was so engrossed, so immersed in his game of chess that somebody had to physically shake him, and then he kind of went out of it and kind of came back to reality. And they said all the fire alarms are going off, and we need to get out of here because there's a fire. And he was so focused on his chess game, he had no idea that was even going on. So I'm really interested if this trance-like state, if it's similar to other people in other fields, if it's just that we use it on our daydreams, if that's kind of the crux of if that's what immersive daydreaming is. Daydreams if it's similar to the other kind of immersive states that other people go into for other things. I guess that's what I want to know.
Yeah, I really agree with Halo on this one. Is seeing the neuroscientific studies behind, maybe even like the difference between maladaptive daydreamers and immersive daydreamers, like seeing the data, seeing how the brains differ and things like that. I recently watched an episode where MRI scans were done on people while they were meditating, and it's absolutely fascinating, going into that space of mind where you're just, I suppose the activity would be, the brain would be very active, but it would be very interesting to see that visually. So yeah, I really do agree with Halo on this.
That's going to do it for this episode of Parallel Lives. Thanks for coming. Next episode is actually going to be a special episode. We're going to have a special guest, Jane Rachel, who is, she's the first maladaptive daydreamer, the first one really studied. Patient X, they call her. And to this day, she is a strong advocate for maladaptive daydreaming and works tirelessly to spread awareness. So we are going to be sitting down with her. So definitely come to that one. We publish the 1st and the 16th of every month. You can join the Discord if you want to be part of the audience. Just add the podcast roll to yourself, and I don't know, you can join there or whatever. Yeah, oh my god, I trailed off there so hard. Like, share, subscribe, comment, follow, I don't know, whatever the button is where you're listening. Thank you.
You could have shilled harder. You could have mentioned the voice chats on the Discord and stuff.
Oh my god, we lost Levi.
Oh, sorry, no, it's just I have a very bad connection, so like every now and then it just like stops, like I just hear nothing, so yeah, I just rejoined.